began, in fact, I did a part, I'd say about 30% of the art of the shiur at the last day that we had. And that's unfair. It's unfair for people who were not here. It's unfair for people who don't quite remember everything that I said, including myself. Therefore, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start in the beginning, okay? I'm going to start from the beginning of this year. If you find it to be, familiar to you, I'll be happy and surprised. But anyway, it'll be good. But it's such an important shiur, in my opinion, that I don't want it to be broken up and not remembering the whole view and the whole, mahalach, I'd say in Hebrew, of the shiur. It's a shiur that at first seems not to be a problematic one, a question that doesn't seem to be problematic. It is, as I entitled it, the promised land, but which one? As strange as that sounds, one who looks into the Tanakh and into the Torah itself would find that there's more than one definition of what's considered the boundaries of the Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash, to the promised land. Promised to Abraham, to Yitzchak, and to Yaakov. But we never really know. In fact, I would bring to you the news for some people that the very boundaries of what they called then Eretz Canaan are found before in the Torah, before there was Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, in the Pasha of Noah, and there it talks about the Eretz Canaan. And there it gives a general area, and it's different than what we would call the promised land. So defining it in one way is understandable because there are different things. But I'm going to, and we did start to focus more specifically on when there was an Israel and when they began. Okay. And they began to settle the land. And there really is a question. And that is, of course, when they began to conquer the land and actually settle it. And that was in the 40th year when they were in the desert, when they were attacked by Sichon and Og, who denied them the right to go through, denied Israel the right to march through on the highway just to cut through, and as others, by the way, Moab, Ammon, and Edom also didn't allow it. The difference was simple. They just said no. Sichon and Og came out in an army and attacked. A little difference. In those days, when you attack, you start a war. Nowadays, but maybe not. At any rate, that's what we're going to discuss. What precisely is the land that God promised to the descendants of Abraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov? That's us. Okay, he gave us the land, but what's the land? And when you look in the Torah, we have one view that says, Ad ha-nahar ha-gadol nahar prat, that it goes north as far as the Euphrates, right up in Iraq, down to the south of Nachal Mitzrayim, somewhere in the Sinai. That whole area is going to be yours. And then, when you look at Pashat Matot Mas'eh, there you have specifics, that it goes down, that the eastern border will be the Yarden. Well, that's only on the western side of on the east of that is not yours. Even though God said, you're going to go up to the Iraq, which is east. So we have different boundaries. And so which one was promised? God kidding around? I mean, why? What? And we're going to, as I said last time, but really going to focus specifically on that one area, that is the east. What do we call it now? The East Bank. It's not the West Bank. The East Bank. I was a rabbi in Fort Lee, New Jersey, which is on the other side of New York. It's in New Jersey, over the George Washington Bridge, as the Hudson River breaks the difference between the two. So I had a friend of mine, a rabbi, who called me the rabbi from the West Bank, because I was the West Bank of the, not quite. Anyway, there was, of course, the call when Zionism began. When we began the new Zionist call, that really was, how should I put it, revolutionary. Revolutionary in that for the times when Jews were in Gullus, whether they be in the Ashkenazi world or in the Sephardic world, the concept was that God will bring us there. We'll come when God says we should. It is ironic because the greatest of the rabbis, the Vilna Gaon, the believe it or not, the his opponent, as it were, the one who started Hasidus. What? Yeah, the Baal Shem Tov. And others didn't say that. They said it is a mitzvah to go there. So there's a Ramban and others. But that was the thing. And I hate to put it in it negatively, but I think historically that is true. It was the concept, almost an exilic concept with a realization there's no reality to be able to go in there. It was a very difficult trip. It was very dangerous. And how are we going to take over the land? How are we going to somehow settle the land? So they sort of rested on God's going to do it. There's the irony, because the whole story of Devarim and later on is that God tells them through Moshe, God ain't going to do it anymore. You have to go into the land. You have to conquer the land. You have to be agriculturists. You have to take care of businesses. You have to do something. I'm not going to give you man every day. But that was an understandable reaction to a Jewish community which didn't feel that they had the ability to really do anything this time. So when the, I'm sorry, I'm going to use the word Zionists. When they started to to say, we can do this, and we should start. And they came the end, especially in the end of the 19th century. They came in and after the pogroms in Russia and the terrible May laws and so on and so forth. They left people like Ben Gurion, who wasn't his name in Russia, but they came from there to find a better life, and they came to Palestine. Another dirty word. Yes.
What did those people say once there was a Medina and they didn't come?
Have
They
you
didn't say anything.
Have you looked around? Look at your grandchildren. Tell me.
No, when I'm talking about the big rebellion who didn't come here.
There are many who did, by the way. But yes, there were those who they look. You have to understand the time and the people and everything about that. And don't make a mistake that the great Rabbanim, and they were brilliant, were not faultless or not. It's not true. They weren't Nevi'im. You know, they did the best they can from what they knew. God didn't speak to them, no matter what, and the Hasidic people said. How many of the Rebbeim told the Jewish communities in Europe in 1940, 41, don't run away, stay here, we'll be fine. I fear to imagine what Kadosh Baruch Hu is saying after, and says, all the millions are coming up there. He turns to the Rebbe and says, you told them to stay there, didn't you? Why? What gave you the right to think that you know enough? I'm so happy to hear when someone would say, look, I don't know for this. You have to make that decision. I'll be going, or I'm going to be staying. That's okay. But to say, you can stay here because nothing will happen, is a terrible, terrible thing. And the concept that if you have emunah, all will be well, it's not only emunah. It's, are you that egotistical to believe that you deserve God should save you? I'm not going to run into the downstairs machsan to make sure nothing's going to happen to me because the missile is coming. Because God will protect me. I'm going to go to shul anyway, even though the government says don't go to shul because you might get hit. No, it won't, because God's going to protect me. Chutzpah. It's a chutzpah. Because what it's saying is that I am so important and so wonderfully religious, God's going to serve me. No, he says, what God says to you is, you're an idiot, get into the way you deserve. And if you don't do it, that's not being religious, that's not being faithful. That's being foolish. That's true. So at any rate, you asked the question, and there were people who said this and this, but that. The same reason why the 90%, probably, maybe 95% of the rabbis and everything were completely against the Zionist movement. I understand why. Okay. But they were against it, so much so that there really was, they sanctified Gullus. Everything in Gullus is wonderful. And as one who's a historian as well, or at least a student of history, and I see that, how many things and how many important minhagim was based upon the limited ability of what was happening in society. This was dangerous then, so you can't do it, So this is part of what it's true and it's fine and it's what the rabbi should do for that time. So at any rate, there is the battle of the Israelites, Bnei Israel, against Og and Sichon, and you know the story that they defeated the two. Now, as I started to say before we asked the questions, before the establishment of the state of Israel in the 40s, there was a very what we call them Beitar, perhaps. They were the revisionists, the pre-state revisionists used to sing the song, there are two sides to the Jordan River. This one is ours. Yeah, so is the other one. That both sides are ours. That's what they were saying, especially after the Balfour Declaration, which said that Palestine will be a Jewish state. And then they said, no, we meant that part of Palestine will be a Jewish state. And so in 23, the wonderful decision that they took the 100% of the Palestine area and took 77% of it away and gave 23% left for the Jews, which eventually, of course, then became 12% of it, because when they started to split it up, with the Peel. So anyway, but they were saying that both sides. Who's right? Is the western part of the Jordan part of Israel? It would seem obviously so. Certainly in Tanakh time. But what about the eastern side, where we hear at one point that yes, they're going to go all the way up to the Nahar Prat, up to Iraq, and that's all going to be. And by the way, David HaMelech did go over. And that's what it is. Is that also part of it? Was that what God promised? Or is that what God said? Didn't plan on it, but if you take it over, that's okay. That's why the question is, what's the promised land? And that's the story. So before we go in to these specifics, we have to start with the story of Reuven and Gad, the two tribes, Reuven and Gad, and eventually brought also by one family of Menashe. I would say the Chatzi Shevet Menashe. I think we gave these out, right? You have them? Good. So you see there, some nice guy, I made it in English too. What happens, what was happening? The tribes of Reuven and Gad. I want you to know how hard it is for me to take the English and try to make it English. But sometimes I was too lazy, so you got some of these words here. So the tribes of Reuven and Gad owned cattle in very great numbers, noting that the lands of Yazer and Gilad were suitable for cattle. The leaders of Gad and Reuven came to Moshe and they said, the land that God has conquered for Israel is cattle country, and we have much cattle. You'd think that Moshe would catch up on it. Moshe says nothing. And then it says Vayomru. So I didn't. Vayomru. They said, well, it would be a favor to us if this land were given to us, and not move us across the Jordan. That's what we'd like to. Okay. That was their request. Okay. The Hebrew, in that last words of the first paragraph, Al ta'virenu et hayarden, really is almost stronger words. Don't force us to get over there. Don't move us across the Jordan, which is a painful word I always see, and maybe I'm being overly sensitive to it. But I believe this is don't let us go. That kind of thing. And Moshe replies. He doesn't reply to that specifically. Moshe replies, as we all know, and he says, what? He says, I'll keep out of the politics here. But it says, what? Should your brothers go to war to conquer the rest of it, and you'll stay over here? They're going to risk their lives. They're going to fight to get the and you're being very happy over there. See, who conquered the Sichon and Og? Did Reuven and Gad conquer that? No. Who did? All of Israel. So all of Israel is going to go and fight. And they said, no, we'll do is stay here. Moshe gets very angry. He says, why would you discourage the Israelites from crossing into the land that God has given us? You did the same sins as 39 years ago the Meraglim did. The spies did the same thing when they said, we will never conquer this land. They're too strong for us. And you are, by doing so, you are discouraging the rest of the people from going in and fighting. You can discourage the army from having courage and power. When you do that, it's crucial. It's crucial. Again, don't say anything about today. But that's what happens. You're undermining the war and the strength of the people. So how do you do that? He says, and you were punished because of that, and so on and so forth. The Seder. That was his response. So here was, Bnei Israel had just defeated the Amorite people, Sichon and Og, and the tribes now feel that we have seen, so we're the ones who have lots of cattle, we would like to stay here, right? And Moshe, when he objects really on two different levels. The first one is a moral one. How dare you give the responsibility of taking over God's promised land to give to us and leave it to your brethren, and you're not part of it. You're not part of this land, of this nation. How dare you stay here nice and comfortable in your new land with all of your cattle and your beautiful pasture land while we go and fight. So immorally, you're turning your back on the people. How do you do that? It's on one hand, it's a sin against God, but it's a sin against your brethren. Ben Adam l'chaveiro also. And that was his first objection. The second objection is a faith-based objection. Number one, it's not fair that you're going to stay here when everybody else fights for it. Number two, why are you going to discourage the people? How dare you show a lack of faith in God? What do you discourage people? By saying that you're not going to go over, it's like, that's what he meant, that you're like the spies. And by doing so, that means that you have a lack of faith in God, and like it happened with the spies, it made the rest of the people have a lack of faith in God's ability to conquer the land. So that's a doubly also, it is an objection against how you are hurting the people and how you are against God. They're both of these objections really are both ben adam l'chaveiro and ben adam l'makom. And because of these two objections of Moshe Rabbeinu, the two tribes have a resolution. One sees almost as if they didn't take it into account, didn't realize that this is what was happening. I'd like to put it in a more positive view. He said, oops, didn't realize that. So I'll tell you what we're going to do. So what do they say? And they say, as you see in the second source sheet, in the second part of the source sheet, if you want one, you'd like one here? Yeah, good. I don't want to have too many to take home. Okay, good. And in there, you see in the English there, they stepped up to him, meaning they stepped up to Moshe, and they said, I'll tell you what we'll do, Moshe. I'm sure they didn't say that, but it was like that. They said, we will build here sheepfolds for our flocks. Did you like how I kept that word, sheepfolds? What the heck was that? I don't know, but so I put down sheepfolds. Yeah. We will build the sheepfolds for our flocks and towns for our children, and we will hasten as shock troops, in other words, in the vanguard of the Israelites until we have established them in their home. So listen to what I have to say. Moshe had two objections, and look how they respond to those two objections. Number one, you're right. We will go with them. We will fight with them. So don't be afraid, and not only that, but that they will be fearful. They wouldn't. But we are showing them that we do have faith in God and faith in the victory we're going to have. We will be in the vanguard of the army. If you know anything about the armies in the ancient world, and ancient world includes the War of 1812 in the United States too. Certainly the Revolutionary War, where the British, not only the British, the French did the same thing. The great thing is to put all your large army in a big rows, and you march with them, and the Americans say, this is dumb. So they sat behind trees and started shooting at them. And then, so the vanguard is the most dangerous spot to be. If you're going to be surrounding a city, if you're going to invade that way, well, if you're in the front lines, you're the targets. See, they do that also. Not only are we going to go, we are going to be in the vanguard. So don't worry about, they'll be. We will lead the battle. But they say something else at the end. It says, they then add to that, we will do these things, be in the vanguard, and then they say at the very end, that we will lo nashuv el batenu, we will not return back to our homes until every one of the Israelites are in possession of their portion. We promise to stay there not only for the battles and for the wars. We promise we'll stay with them until they settle their area. Now understand what this means. It'll give a better idea in Tanakh of what the whole era of Yahushua was about. The idea that many people think, because they don't know, unfortunately, because after all, after the Torah, there is nothing else. But if you look at Yahushua, Sefer Yahushua, it wasn't Yahushua's mission or responsibility to wipe out everybody and then everybody happy. His job was to defeat the allies, the enemy allies. Those were armies that had gathered together and were real threats to an Israelite army, and to defeat them, thereby leaving only little pockets of what we would call the National Guard, I guess, in the United States. That's a little small, and they weren't small armies. And that was a job of the tribes. So if Yehuda was going into the portion that was given to him, it was his job to clean up that thing and keep the idolaters out of there. And that was true of all 12 tribes. If that were done, we'd only have 6 books of the Tanakh. It was the failure of the tribes to do just that. About 2 or 3 did. But the rest of them said, they're nice guys here. They're okay. You know what? They do the great job also. We're having them clean up the streets, and we're having them, doing their stuff. We're Jews. We don't know how to do these things. So we call them up. They'll change the light bulb. We don't have to. They become part. They let the idolaters become part. It's a lot easier to live with people, be nice to them, and so on and so forth, and to have fights with them. And that's what happened. And from Sefer Shoftim through the end of Tanakh, every story, everything is really all about the failure of getting rid of the idolatry in the land, which is the number one thing God told them to do. Get rid of the goyim. Not the goyim, it's the idolatry, the concept. If they actually give up idolatry, they could stay there, no problem. You can't have a culture that is so absolutely horrific. No, they don't have that now. Right. And allow that to remain. There are some uncomfortable truths. It's uncomfortable for the 21st case. That uviarta hara mikirbecha. Unfortunately, a moral community has to get rid of the immoral, dangerous culture. So they didn't. And that's why you have all the problems we have in Shoftim, and all the fights of the armies and the battles in the Shmuel and the kings. What happened with the kings? And why are the Nevi'im, the prophets, are also saying, "You sinned, you did that." All the bad things happened because they didn't do the right thing. At any rate. So what they do now, however, is that they said, but and more than just be there for the 7 weeks of getting rid of all the we'll stay there until everybody's in their land. Okay, fine. And then we'll go out to our land, which is very nice. And this is what they promised to do. And Moshe agrees to it. Moshe Rabbeinu says, great idea. Then it's okay. And you see in the third source, in the right side, Moshe's response to the tribes. Moshe says to them, if you do this, if you go to battle as a shock troop before God, and every fighter crosses the Jordan before God, until God defeats the enemies and subdues the land, then you may return and be clear before Hashem and Israel, and the land shall be your holding before God. But if you do not do so, you will have sinned against God, and your sin will overtake you. You notice something repeating over there, just a tad? What is he pushing there? God. Do you think it's my Moshe is saying? It's not my law. This is something that God had told you to do. Do it right, great. You're going to terrific. Do it wrong, it's your sin against God, and as you'll see, also against the people. And that's what Moshe's response is. Okay? It says, yeah. And then Moshe tells the leaders, okay, I had a one-on-one with the 2.5 tribes. We came into a agreement, and I agreed with him. Now he has to tell the leaders, because he ain't going to be there. He has the next generation and the next generation of leaders who will have to carry out the promise. So he goes to the leaders, and there you see on the other side, Moshe's directives to the leaders, to the future leaders, where he says he gave instructions to Elazar, who was the Kohen Gadol, of course, Aaron's son, and Yoshua, and the heads of the tribes. He says, look, if every shock fighter among Gad and the Ruvain crosses the Jordan with you to do battle, and the land is subdued before you, you shall give them the land of the Gilad as a holding. But if they do not cross over with you as shock troops, they shall receive holdings among you in land of Canaan. You see what I'm doing here by underlying? The first thing he tells them to the Reuven and Gad is, it's for God, under God, and therefore you're sinning against God. He tells the leaders they're not only sinning against God, they'd be sinning against you. They're part of you, understand that. If they don't do it, that then, you know how they'll be part of you? They won't be able to go on that land. They'll stay in the western side of the Jordan, and they won't live there because they'll be part of you. That was a tough punishment, I guess, but it wasn't, because Moshe understood that what's going to happen when the tribes are now in different areas. What's going to be? Are you going to still be Am Yisrael? I've often tried to explain much to about this area, this era, as comparing it to the years of, let's say, I guess, 1781 to 1789, in which in America was what they call the Articles of Confederation. That each state was more or less independent, but they confederated with each other, and they would would they have different monies and this and that, so on. So in effect, that's what it was. Unfortunately, after the first 5 years of doing that, not one student knew what an Articles of Federation was, so it didn't help at all. But that was the era. That's what it was. What's going to happen with Am Yisrael become Am Yisrael, or will I be not an Israelite? I'm a Danite. I'm a Gadite. I'm an Issacharite. I don't know. I'm a fluorescent light. Whatever it is, I'm not going to be part of Israel. I'll be mostly part of And you see in Shoftim often when people say, "Who are you?" I said, "Ephrati Anochi." I'm from Ephraim. Yehudi. The concept of Yehudi as being a Jew only comes because people they're from Judea, they're from Yehuda. Where do we see Yehudi? Of course, you see that in Megillat Esther. That he's called the Yehudi, and yet he's called the Yehudi. And what tribe is he from? Binyamin. So by that time already, the concept of Yehudi was all of them. Why? Because all the other 10 tribes were taken away. So what was left was primarily Yehuda, although between you and me, let's not lie about it, they also had Levi there, they also had Binyamin there, they also had Shimon there, and a lot of others. If we look into the Tanakh and into Divrei Hayamim, you see a lot of the tribes that were not, the northern tribes were not exiled, they stayed there. And some of them went down to join Yehuda. Some of them didn't. We see that the king, what's his name, Yoshiyahu, as well as Chizkiyahu, went north, and they actually brought them back, or they tried to teach them, even though because there was so much loss from the northern kingdom, from the split from the southern kingdom, that part came. So when we say that the lost 10 tribes, it wasn't really 10 tribes. Point is, they were all Yehudi. So that was the fear. We want them to have one country, and so as we see the tribes respond positively, saying we're going to do what you said to us to do, and we're going. But he said we're going to keep our wives and our young children here with some guards, obviously, so that they can protect these cities that we're going to be in, but we'll all go to fight with Israel and lead the fight as we promised. And the other tribes said to Moshe, yes, I should say the two also then Yeah. But basically, what I have over here is that he's telling Moshe that they would go into the battle before they said, and also we're going to first set up these cities for our families. All right, very, very nice. So, in effect, the tribes are going to cross the Yarden, and they're going to be with their people, but they're going to eventually come back, and they'll even lead the fight. But they plan to do that, and if they don't do that, Chatasem Lashem, you will be sinned against God and sinned against your people as well. And once we understand that, we then can ask, if I were to ask you, okay, they got this. Was this part of the promised land? Is this part of what God promised them to be? What does it seem to be? Seemingly, it seemed to indicate that this was not really part of the promised land. Were it part of the promised land,
They wouldn't have to ask for it.
Huh?
They wouldn't have to ask for it.
They wouldn't have to ask for it. They said, we'll settle here.
Yeah.
We can go more than that. When it was divided up in Matos Masei, then nothing was divided up there. And that's the thing that before, that was, they didn't have to divide them. That portion was given to them already. It seems that this portion of land became part of Eretz Israel, but it wasn't promised at first of that. All right, you won it, you fought it, and you conquered it. So okay, I'll let you stay there. But was it promised as part of the promised land? It doesn't seem so at all. That's what it seems. And then you make a mistake, and you open up Sefer Devarim. And then Sefer Devarim, as you see in the fourth Daled, so when you read that, all of a sudden things begin to fall apart. Our assumptions seem to be incorrect. Moshe Rabbeinu in Dvarim, he's the one who talks the whole time, goes and tells the story of how they conquered that area of Sichon and Og. And I go through all of this. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Yeah. And to Reuven and Gad I assigned a part of Gilad and up to Yabok. We also see the Arava, this and that. At that time, I charged you, the men of Reuven, Gad, and Manasseh, saying, Hashem has given you this country, this to possess. God is giving it to you. To possess as a Yerusha. Yerusha is not as conquest, but as possession. It's part of it, so on and so forth. That is very, very crucial. And that long portion that I bring here from Devarim, from Sefer Devarim, does not at all tell the story that they went and that Sichon, that the two tribes came to Moshe. They said, please, we want to have a place. No, what does it say? And Moshe gave it to them. As he gave it to the other, as he portioned off the rest of the tribe of Israel on the western side of the Jordan, so it portioned us off to them. Never in Dvarim does Moshe mention, and they came to me and they said, and I said to them, how dare you, you're not going to cross that whole wonderful story, one with you can make a cartoon out of it. It's a great story. Moshe doesn't mention it. Indicating a bit, at least, that God gave it to you. Whether God told me this is part of the land, whatever. But it doesn't seem to be saying a reluctance, and all right, you can have it. Or God, had not given it. It's really problematic. The word that Yirashuha in Hebrew, as an inheritance, it was given to you as an inheritance. That's what it means. You're not when you take something, God can't do that. Gave it to you as an inheritance. What did I give as an inheritance? From Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, you are now inheriting this part of the land, which means it was part of the God's ideas. One was part of the promised land. From Devarim, that seems to be what Moshe is actually saying. And just as we come to that, and we don't see so much the usage of the use kavashnu, that we conquered this land. We go back to the Sefer Bamidbar, and there we don't find it that way. And there in the fifth source, you see that I have there? There when he has the story of what happened before the two tribes came and asked for the part. There it says that Israel sent messenger to Sichon, saying, let me pass through your country. We will not turn off into fields or vineyards, nor drink water from the wells. We will follow the king's highway and until we have crossed through your territory. But Sichon would not let Israel pass through territory. He gathered all his troops and went out against Israel and engaged Israel in battle. Why was Israel battling for this land? Or was it even battling for the land? Why? Because they were attacked. It's a funny thing. When you're attacked, your enemy attacks and wants to kill you, you're allowed to fight back. Shh, don't tell that too loud nowadays. That's what happened. So was it that God said, now take up, this is your land, go and take it over, because this is the land that's promised. Were it not for Sichon and Og, if they had not, if they had finally given an agreement and said, okay, I'll let you go through, no problem, what would have happened? Would that land become part of the promised land? No. To it seem not. Sometimes all you have to do is give in a little bit, and you don't have wars. Sorry, that's what happens. And so much of this, Rav Amnon Bazak brings up this. He really teaches me this whole approach. It's fascinating and very, very powerful. That is what we read in Bamidbar. He says, so in the end, he said, but Israel defeated them and took possession of their land from Arnon to Yabok, so on and so forth. It's only because they attacked. Otherwise, they would have had it. And even then, they could have just simply they could have simply, I don't know, somehow defended themselves and gone on. They were attacked by the Canaanites, defeated them, the Canaanites ran away. But here was more than that. They not only defeated them, they took over the land. Taking over a land is basically the beginning of conquering a land. By the way, that's why Chazal tells us that Moshe thought that, I guess I am allowed to go into the land because you told me I couldn't, but now I see that we're conquered this land. It seemed it was that land. And God said no. So again, we have this side. If this as if this were wonderful, and this that these lands east of the Yarden really was not supposed to be part of the land. And I'll show you even more. Almost a proof that it was never supposed to be part of the land, but God sort of said, okay, you can live there. And the proof is from Sefer Yehoshua. At the end of Sefer Yehoshua, after 14 years, 7 years of battle, 7 years of settling down for everybody there, and they kept their promise, did God and Reuven. And they stayed there. Now it was all over. No, the local wars were over. You take care of it yourself. We can get back to our kids we haven't seen for so long, and our wives, and we can go back. And they go up north to cross over towards the eastern side of the Jordan, and Sichon Og land over there, Golan Heights, that type of thing there, a little south of that. So after that, 14 years, the 2.5 tribes return home, and on their way, they build a mizbeach, they build a monument, an altar, actually, before they cross over to the eastern side. They build an altar. Well, the Israelites are saying goodbye to them, and some of them watched them, and they were outraged. What? You know the halacha. You're not allowed to build an altar to God, except in the Mishkan. You have to, all service to God, all ritual to God has to be done in the Mishkan. What right do you have to build a mizbeach, outside of the Mishkan? What are you doing? And what did they think? They believe that it's not a mizbeach to God. If it is, it's wrong. But you start to now a new religion. And listen to what they say in Yehoshua. Unbelievable. Because where is it? Where's Yehoshua? There on top of on Zion. So the representatives of the Israelites, before they were able to cross over the thing, run to them. And they say to the 2.5 tribes, what is this treachery that you have committed this day against God, turning away from him and building an altar and rebelling against God? That's how they see this. Is the sin of Peor, which brought a plague upon us, such a small thing that happened just a few months before they entered Canaan. So it's 14 years earlier. It said, we have not even been purified ourselves from it to this day. And now you turn away from God? If you rebel against him today, tomorrow his anger will be directed at the entire community of Israel. They're screaming at them. What are you doing? And listen to these words. This is the words that are going to blow your socks off. If it is because the land of your holding is impure, cross over into the land of Hashem's holding, where the tabernacle abides, and acquire properties among us. Do you hear that? They said, your land is not the pure land. Our land is a pure land. That's the one that God gave us, so we have everything here. So cross over to us instead of living in that impure land. That certainly says to me that was not God's promised land. that wasn't seen as God's promised land. And they could have simply said, what are you talking about? We have the same land that was promised to God, was promised to us too. They don't say that. So it wasn't the promised land. But maybe it was the promised land. And that's why we're going to stop now and find out. Yes?
This kind of answers the question that I was having. Somehow the word Gilead has so many different meanings, and I don't know in biblical.
Well, that whole area there with Gilad, yeah.
Can you say a little bit about that?
Well, the first time we see the Gilad is found in the book of Bereshit, and there we find that Lavan and Yaakov make a compromise and an agreement, when Yaakov flees from Lavan's house and Lavan catches up to him. And so Lavan says, okay, well, after their argument, let's make peace. And he says, build up now rocks here, and this pile will be witnesses, right? The gal, the promise, is an aid, it will be a witness. And that's how Gal-aid was called, and eventually becomes Gilad. That area, from what happened, was called that. Then eventually the entire area was called the area of Gilad. That's how they, yeah. All right, I hope Mr. Hashem will continue next time if I remember what it was about. Good. All right.